Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for Underscore's latest webinar, Stump the Slate Squad. If you have been wondering how to do something in Slate, or you have questions about Slate, here's your chance to ask the experts. Our 13 full-time Slate Squad members are here for you. 8 of them will be on the screen, while the other 5 will be answering your questions behind the scenes. Do you think you have what it takes to stump them? Today's your opportunity. Before we begin, I want to mention a few housekeeping items. The webinar will be recorded and will be posted on our YouTube page and emailed to all attendees. We ask you to post your questions to the Q&A box, not the chat box below. We'll answer as many questions as time allows, and we'll follow up with any unanswered questions on our blog. Now we'd like to introduce ourselves and all those who are participating in today's webinar. My name is Chris Coons, Director of Business Development here at Underscore. Joined Underscore in July of 2019 after 25 years in enrollment management. Now we'll hand it off to Megan Robinson in our Implementation and Consultation Division.
Hi everyone, my name is Megan Robinson and I'm the Director of Implementation and Consultation here at Underscore. Been here about 2 years. Prior to this, I was at Hanover College. I'm from Indiana, and that's not my only fun fact for today. I'd also like you all to know that today is my birthday, and I grew up on a quail farm. So 2 fun facts for the day. Rob?
Thanks, Megan. I'm Rob Tellerico. I am the Senior Implementation Strategist in the Implementation and Consultation Division. So I work closely with Megan. I've been with Underscore for a little over a year now. Prior to joining Underscore, I've had a number of different roles in higher education admissions at several different universities in Pennsylvania and New York. I was even a college counselor for a few years. And most of those institutions are in, so here's my fun fact, Pittsburgh, PA. So I am a proud Pittsburgher, bleed black and gold. So we won't talk about what happened last night.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ted Majensky. I'm the Director for Slate Communications here at Underscore. I've been here about 3 years actually at Underscore. So my fun fact is I'm the original. So not necessarily the best, but the original. Before that, I worked on the implementation of Slate at the University of Cincinnati and then have been here ever since.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Mernon. I'm one of the Slate strategists, and I work within the communications division. I'm actually coming up to my 1-year anniversary at Underscore very soon in the next couple of weeks. And I worked in higher education just shy of 10 years before that. My fun fact also come from University of Cincinnati, so go Bearcats. And then my other fun fact that I have to think of on the fly is that I have a life goal of learning how to do a cartwheel. Many different life goals, but that is one of them, believe it or not. Thank you.
I'm shocked you can't do a cartwheel. I did not know this.
Oh, no, terrible.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Latore. I'm a Slate strategist in the comm division, and I've been with Underscore for about 10 months. But I've worked in higher ed for about 7.5 years. And most recently, I worked at LaSalle University in Philadelphia, where I was a Slate captain and was part of the implementation team. And I couldn't really think of a fun fact on the fly. However, I guess my fun fact I'll say is that I got my start in higher ed by being a tour guide at Penn State. So, you know, if you've ever been there, you know, hearing us say we are around campus, that was probably me. But that's all for me, and I'll send it over to Jim.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Rogers. I'm the Director of Enrollment Strategy. I've been in higher ed for 25 years and with Underscore for 2 years now. I was previously at 2 liberal arts colleges as Director and Dean of Admission, and also implemented my slate back in 2015 on my previous campus and fell in love with it, as we all have in this group here today, hopefully. I didn't think of a fun fact, but I guess I'll say I love traveling internationally, which obviously is not very fun right now because we can't do it. So hopefully we'll get back to that. And my kind of most famous fun fact is I've met and hugged Madonna for several minutes and had a conversation with her.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremiah Tudor. I'm the Director of Special Projects at Underscore. I've been with Underscore for just over 1.5 years. And prior to that, I was the Dean of Admissions at Georgetown College in Central Kentucky. And my fun fact, and most people who've worked with me so far know this, is Since the pandemic, I have turned my closet into an office. So now I work out of my closet. Now, luckily, nobody can see exactly what is behind me, but I'm in a small room, a very, very small, dark room. So definitely look forward to this webinar today. And I hand it over to Chris.
Last but not least, my name is Chris Carl. I'm the Slate strategist in the Special Projects Division. Right now, I work primarily on student portals. I've been in higher ed for about 10 years now, most recently at the University of Mary Washington, which is in Fredericksburg, Virginia. I was their Slate captain and CRM manager for about 3 years or so. My fun fact is I went to school in Scranton, Pennsylvania at Marywood University and also worked there afterwards. I lived there for about 8 years or so, and I can answer any trivia question you throw at me about The Office. So throw it in the Q&A and I'll answer it.
Great, thanks everyone. And behind the scenes, we have in our implementation and consultation division, Matt Herr and Laura Bald. In our Slate Communications division, we have Jessica Sievert and Amanda Johnson. And in our enrollment strategy division, we have Amanda Garay-Cedeno. Are we ready, guys?
Ready.
All right, here we go. We're gonna start off. First question comes from Moore College of Art and Design. Can you create a conditional checklist item for a group of accepted applicants that requires a form completion and document submission where said documents can later be exported en masse?
So Chris, I can, if as long as nobody else minds, I can take this one. So building checklists is something we do a lot. Megan and I, as we're working with our implementation clients, we do a lot with building checklists and making sure that the schools are doing it in the most effective manner. And it really is important to get right, because checklist items can affect so many other things in Slate, from your application status rules, from bin movement rules, your queries and reports, your communications. So much is affected by checklist rules. So while it can sometimes seem like a very straightforward thing to do, it really is pretty complex. And one of the first things I like to talk about is just when you're building your checklist rules to build checklist groups that kind of stack on top of each other. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here is when you're thinking about having certain groups or certain checklist items that apply to certain groups of students. If you think about the checklist items in that way, you can really kind of make checklist items pretty effective. So for example, you may have different groups, right? Checklists for applicants, checklists for admitted students, checklists for enrolling students. One example would be to have an enrollment reply form that only appears after a student's been admitted so that they can then accept their offer of admission. Or if you have a housing application for students after they've decided that they're enrolling, that's another example of these kind of checklist items that may apply only to specific groups. And what's nice is that Slate's inherent functionality allows you to add checklist groups, checklist sections, so you can add an admitted student section, an enrolling student section. And so it's really pretty easy to do that. And then you use the rules to kind of decide which group of students that's going to apply for. Another part of the question, having the form kind of be a clickable checklist item. What's nice is that you can take the form URL, add that directly to your checklist item. And so when that item appears on the checklist for students, students will be able to click that link and it will take them directly to the form that you want to apply. The last part of that question, I think, Chris, if I heard that right, is just exporting documents, right? Is that so? What's nice is
Yes.
Yeah, great. Well, what's nice is Slate has a kind of a pre-built document export query base that you can download from the Slate template library that allows you to export all of your materials en masse. You can also export really any items that are in Slate using that same document export query base. So not just materials, but also your forms, your applications, your references, really anything that you have in Slate. Now, to get forms specifically, you do have to create a corresponding material type for that form. And then there are a couple of settings that you have to update both on the original form and the corresponding material type that will allow that document export query base to pick the forms up and export them as well. And then it's just a simple query export export, you build a query using that query base that you can then use to export all of those materials. So hopefully that answers the question. I know there were a few parts to that question, but hopefully I covered them all.
Great, thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. Looks like the next question is from the College of Worcester. Best practices for ongoing campaigns. When do you copy over? You do it with any edits or with only significant edits, certain times each year? Does anybody want to take that one?
I mean, I can, or
How about I start and then you can follow up?
Okay.
So I'll start with kind of the general, and then if you want to talk about rules and populations, get ready for that.
yeah, that works.
All right, so a campaign refresh, there's a lot of different items to it to think about. And the first thing that you want to think about is really going to be that timeline. So that's going to depend on a lot of different aspects of the campaign. So type of campaign, as well as entry terms included. Those are going to be two main factors. So for example, if this is a search or application generation campaign, you're typically going to want to look at a refresh in the summer to get ready for when applications open. And then if you're looking at something like a yield or admitted student campaign, it really depends on when you want to start that. So if you want to start that when decisions are released, you're looking at refreshing that in the fall. If you want to maybe start that campaign when financial aid packages are dropped, you're going to look at refreshing in the winter. So once you determine the timeline, that's going to help you a lot with following up the next process. But when you determine timeline, you have your start date. You also want to think of an end date, because you don't want to just keep messages running ongoing in Slate. You do want an end date so that you're ready for when you want to refresh it yet again the following year. So we figured out timeline. Now you're going to want to copy messages. So you can easily copy messages within Slate, and then you can make edits that you need. You can include certain messages, you can exclude others, depending on how they performed, and hopefully you have some reporting to help you with that, determine which have the highest click rates, open rates, and be able to adjust that accordingly. I will say folder structure is another thing that I would consider when copying messages as well too, because folder structure is going to play a role within reporting, which is going to tell you how your campaign is doing. So maybe you want to keep the messages in the same folder, you copy them over, and then you archive the old messages, and then it's easy to pull that message mailing folder into a report. Or maybe you want to create a different subfolder and do the same thing. If you do keep in the same folder, actually too, I would say that you're going to want to add additional filter within your report to see how they performed that year versus the previous year. So delivered date is going to help you with that. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Allison, do you want to jump into rules and populations?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the most important parts of running a campaign is your population and your role associated with that population. So one thing we like to keep in mind is try to keep the population itself very general, something that you can use year to year. So maybe just call it senior search or app gen or yield, not associate an actual year with it. Then with the rule is when you can get more specific. So you don't necessarily need to create a new rule every year. You can just update the existing rule. So if your rule is titled Fall 21 Senior Search or Fall 21 Yield, when you're going in to make the change for the upcoming year, you can just edit all of that to reflect the new year. So one thing you'll want to do is inactivate the population before you make those edits, and then run a quick query to pull all the students that are currently in that population and run a retroactive refresh. And by running that refresh, it'll allow all the rules to run again. And since that rule is inactive, it'll clear all of the existing students or applications from that population. Then once you actually go into the population to make those edits, your rule will be ready to go for when you're ready to launch the campaign again. And when you are ready, all you have to do is activate the population, and then again, just pull a quick query of all the students or applications that need to fall into that population. And again, just run a retroactive refresh, and that'll allow all the rules to run of placing those students or applications into the population, and you'll be ready to go for your campaign. So I think that's it, but I'll turn it back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Allison and Laura. Great answers. Here's another question here from Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science. How can Slate inform admission staff of a newly received document? For example, transcript, letter of recommendation, submitted portfolio, or video interview form as soon as it has been received?
Ooh, Over here. Sorry. I get excited whenever I have an answer. This is totally comm department stuff. So sorry, ladies and Ted. But you can actually set up notification emails and deliver that are based on material upload date. So if a material were to upload to a specific record, you can actually build a recipient list that contains the staff assigned email and have it trigger whenever a material is uploaded based on that timestamp, and then have it send it to the counselor. But there are other caveats that kind of go along with that. You need to also think about the process as a whole. If you are a school that maybe has a time frame where a lot of these materials might be uploaded. And so let's say I'm a counselor, I have a lot of students who all of them, for whatever reason, this past Wednesday, they all uploaded their transcripts. Okay, well, guess what? I'm gonna get an email for each individual one of those if I set it up as an individual notification. So another way to go about it, depending on what your processes allow, is having a query set up that is based on staff assigned, that is also based on materials that were submitted from the previous day. And it's something that the counselor could then go in and access on a daily basis to see if they have any records that actually belong to them that have uploaded. You can even have it notify them. You can have it automatically export overnight, but only if a record exists. And therefore they have been notified that these people have uploaded and what material they uploaded as well. So there are a couple different things that I think could work for that. I've done that in previous instances as well. And there's no right or wrong answer. It really depends on what works for whatever your process would allow. But I would say, think about how many materials you get at one time, because your counselors might not like you too much if you actually set it up and you get a lot of materials in one day. So sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, thanks very much. There's a follow-up question that came in similar to that from Pace University. Is there any way to check for documents received after the decision is made? Does anybody want to take that?
It kind of goes along with what I was doing. Oh, okay, sorry. Go ahead, Megan.
All right, I can't be quiet for this long. You all know me well enough to know I just cannot. There are actually filters for this. So if you just go into an app-based query or a scope query and type in received in your filter, there are several options. There's material after decision confirmed, material received after decision released, after app field timestamp, after bin entry. So you can actually find any new material depending on a larger action taken on the record through those different filters.
Just for the record, anybody who's been on a call with Megan knows that she does take attendance at the beginning of our calls, and she does raise her hand during our calls too.
Hope that helps.
Here's a question I think I would say is right for the implementation and consultation division here. Is there a ranking score or rating system within Slate that can be implemented, whether it's added reporting need or existing feature? It's similar to how other CRMs create a contact rating score. It also can be associated with email or text activities. This came in from William Peace University. Does someone want to take that?
Oh, you want that? Okay.
Dibs.
That's pretty common on our calls too.
So I'm sure you've heard of Predict, and if you haven't, it's basically a tool that allows you to predict the likelihood of enrollment or likelihood to apply for students based on certain factors. And this is something we're continually testing and playing with as it continues to be developed, and I'm sure you all are as well. But aside from that tool, there are actually other ways in Slate that you can score student records. So some of the ways we've done that before through interaction codes, origin sources. You'll see if you actually go to insert an interaction or an origin source, there's a little score box. And that's what that was designed for. You can then build a rule that kind of takes a predictive formula, regression model, whatever you're looking at, and then actually calculating a rating score based on that quantitative data. This is probably a very specialized formula, so I would be careful as you start to build that out, especially as you start bringing in behavior data. Because, I mean, obviously, the more I visit, that's going to show you an increased likelihood to apply or enroll, but it can only raise my rating score so many times, right? What does my 12th visit show you that my 10th visit didn't? So that's something to keep in mind. And actually, you can reach out to Technolutions with the ticket. They are really good at helping you kind of troubleshoot that formula. That's something we've done in the past. You also mentioned, I think in the question, Chris, email and text activities. So these are certainly critical to calculating scores as well. We actually just implemented a process for Bob and Brooke, actually Brooke being on the call in Indiana Tech. There are different ways you can do it. So whether you want a rating score 1 to 5, or if you want red, yellow, green, or high, low, you can actually build queries that pull the number of students that have opened an email X number of times, or clicked an email X number of times, even clicked on a link through ping data. And you can actually pull the different levels or thresholds that my engagement score would be. The thing to note about that process, though, this is always my caveat in doing this, is that opening an email or clicking an email or clicking on a link that's tracked through ping, that's not enough to update the rules on your record. So even if you do have rules that say Megan opened an email 5 times, or she clicked on a link 3 times, me doing that, taking that action isn't enough to convert me to an inquiry if it's a person status rule, or to convert me to a high level or a 5 ranking or whatever it might be. So what we would recommend is taking the queries that you're building that pull those students and exporting them to your SFTP, and then ingesting that same file, even if the only thing that you're mapping when it comes back into the instance is the Slate ID, just so that acts as a refresh, and then the rules will rerun on your record, and then you'll see that record, maybe on the dashboard you add it there, has a new rating score or engagement level or something like that. So lots of different options there.
Great, thanks, Megan. Another question we have here from the College of Worcester. If UTM codes are used, do you create copies of campaigns for various populations, or do you leave them generic?
So the short answer is it depends, which is like that's the kind of the default one. Part of it's your conversations with your marketing department, because a lot of the conversations we have with admissions, like, we don't necessarily make those decisions. If they're dictating what those UTM codes, I know we're working on this with St. Kate's University quite a bit, is they're the ones dictating the UTM codes. So if our campaigns have to work with what they want us to provide, or want the admissions office to provide on any forms or any communications, like that's kind of what we're going to go with. Ideally, it would be kind of generic, only because, for our purposes, and anytime we have communications where we might pull in multiple populations, we don't do it super often, but there are opportunities, obviously, that you might have the same email grabbing a couple different populations. At that point, it's easier to have the UTM be the same, be generic. It depends, because you can always query off of it differently. You can always report off of it and segment it out by those different populations anyway. So if there's a real need to have UTM be very unique for each type of person in each group and each campaign, you can do that. But ideally, if you're a marketing department and you have that kind of relationship with them, you may not need to be that specific, because there are always going to be other ways you can pull that data, and that's what we usually would recommend. That's all I got.
Thanks, Ted. Another question here, a little lengthy, from Southern Connecticut State University. How to build a cumulative GPA calculator that shows transfer applicants previously attended schools, fields with cumulative credits, QPR, and a tally of cumulative GPA. Ideally built into the reader platform for decision-making, then to map to the appropriate data field.
I nominate Rob, like I do on all of our calls when we're building GPA calculators.
You know how much I love working with GPA fields, Megan. So because it's your birthday, I'll take this one. All right. So I don't like working with GPA fields, but they are really important. And I think the reason why I say that is because GPA fields can be really complex. And part of that is just because of how many different GPA fields you can have, right? You can have student reported GPA, school reported GPA, official GPA, weighted GPA, unweighted GPA, recalculated GPA. Everybody probably knows that Slate provides you a couple of kind of school scoped GPA fields. But a lot of times that's not enough, right? And that's what makes this really complicated. And so I think the first step in building a GPA calculator and really doing anything with GPAs at all, whether it's recalculating a GPA, using a GPA for scholarship rules and awarding scholarship money, whatever it is really just like kind of stepping out of Slate for a minute and thinking about how are you going to manage all these different GPAs? How are you going to collect GPA information? Which GPA information are you going to collect, store? How are you going to manipulate that information? And so I think really figuring that out and thinking about the fields that you need is really that first step. And usually we do see where schools do need to create additional fields. A lot of times those will become app scope fields for GPA, whether it's a recalculated GPA, an official high school GPA, official college GPA. We've had schools where they've had like a nursing GPA that only includes nursing courses or nursing prerequisite courses. And so that's the first step. I think after you do that, the rest of it is all just building a form. We typically, when we've done this in the past, we've built either a reader scope form or an application scope form. I think when you build a reader scope form, what's nice about that is that it can appear, I think as the questioner suggested, it can appear right in the reader along with your pre-existing review form, right on the right-hand side as you're looking at the reader. What's difficult about that is depending on how complex the recalculations you're doing are, it just might not be enough space because that review form is somewhat limited. For example, we've had we have schools that have different calculations for undergrad and for grad. I mentioned the nursing fields. I think we've worked with Mount St. Mary's before, and they have a big nursing program, and so they have specific GPA calculators just for their nursing students, their nursing applicants. And I think in those cases, you really do then need an app scope form. And what we've done is on the review form, the standard review form that your readers are using, we'll put a link there that we link the URL to the form, and it creates a pop-up. So that the reader clicks the link, it pops up on top of the reader. So you can be looking at the transcript, looking at the pop-up, you populate all the information that you need. And you build those calculations on the back end of the form. And once you've created all those crazy GPA fields that I mentioned before, it's really then just a matter of mapping the form correctly so that at the very bottom of the form, you're going to have your overall recalculated GPA, your nursing GPA, your official college GPA, or whatever it might be, official 9 through 11 high school GPA. And it's just a matter of mapping the form correctly so that as the reader completes the form, those fields, those system fields then get populated by the calculations done on that form. So it's nice, you submit the form, it goes away, and you're right back in the reader, so the reader can then continue on with the review of that application. So great question. It's something we do when we're implementing schools. It's something we do with almost all of our implementation schools. So that's pretty common to do, and something that can be really helpful for your readers.
Well, it seems like you really do enjoy that GPA, Rob.
I've just done it a whole lot, that's all.
And actually, just to chime in real quick on that one, because you reminded me of Mount St. Mary's, they were one that wanted to calculate that GPA outside of the reader as well, which is why Rob was mentioning the app scope forms. So we actually also made them an app tab dashboard query, and we embedded a pre-populated link for that student record on the app tab. So if the counselor or whoever needed to just quickly update the GPA, they could just click on that dashboard and then the form would pop out there too. So.
Because almost, that's a great point, Megan, because almost exclusively schools, when we start working with them, they're doing these GPA calculations in an Excel spreadsheet. We don't want that. You don't want to have to be having your readers go out to Excel and doing these crazy calculations in Excel when it can take some time to put together a good GPA calculator, but it's pretty straightforward to do. And it's just really enhances the functionality for your readers. Plus then it stores the form right on the app record.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Megan. Here's a question we received from University of Illinois at Springfield. Our application vendor, EAB Royal, sends us a Royal ID with their applications, which I have imported as an application scope field for matching. However, we discovered that EAB is reusing this ID when applicants apply twice, causing Slate to merge the apps when they are indeed separate. Is it possible to have Slate create a new app even when the field is the same?
I can do that. We've worked a lot with applications. So I think the easiest answer to that is think about the Common App, how you get the same Common App ID, but it appends the year that they're applying so that you know it's a different application, for example. So what I would probably recommend is in the upload data set in your source format, you should set it up as a field fusion, and you can actually overlay another data point to append to the ID number. So if you're bringing in the start term, say it's fall 21, and there's already a fall 21 app out there, if you bring in a field fusion, you can make the ID append to the term, and it can be fall 21 with all the numbers. The next time it comes in, if it's a fall, spring 22 application, that appends, and now it knows that it's not mapped to the right ID. It's going to start a new application, and that way you can avoid duplicates.
Great. Okay, here's a question we received from Creighton University. Anything you can share about portal events widgets that goes deeper than what Slate has shared? The changes that are outlined in the documentation aren't as significant as I hoped. Changing the color on the calendar is great, but I like to customize event headers to be virtual versus in person instead of their present categories, or show February, March, and April at the same time on the calendar view. Seems like a great question for one of our special projects.
Chris Carl, the man loves event widgets.
So yeah, this was, I'd have to say this was one of the most difficult things to get into our student portals effectively, right, Jeremiah?
Oh yeah.
This was a real game changer for us. So just in case everyone wasn't aware, I remember the date, I don't think I'll ever forget the date. It was October 9th. When they rolled this out at 4:30 p.m. and we stumbled across it on the weekend. So Slate rolled out the events widget and it changed the way we approach displaying events on a student portal. The event landing pages with the calendars that had the green space available box and everybody had the same green, that can now be replaced with customized events content. It also allows you to easily convert any of your existing event landing pages into guest or anonymous portals so that you can so you can customize these without recreating the wheel. So this is out there in the knowledge base right now. Throughout the widgets options, you'll see places to add new merge fields, filters that will be displayed to the student directly. You can group the results together when you click on them by date or by date and time or location if you have multiple on the same date. You can also bring in any you can group them together based on template, name, folder, really anything you can think of about the events. This allows you to loop in all the future events that fall into the folder. So you set this once and it brings them in forever. So I think it was February, March, and April, those would all be in the same calendar as long as they all fall into the same folder or template. If you're referring to less frequent events, maybe open houses or yield events that might happen once a month in the spring, what we usually do is we recommend putting those in the list view because they'll just list, the February, the March, and the April event. I'd also mention that you can include appointments from the scheduler module or any forms that might have a deadline. About how you go about customizing these. So part of the events widget rollout was the ability to add CSS classes to individual widgets. So you can now edit any styling of the calendar within the portal through the custom CSS rules in the portal settings. So although this does require you to have a bit of coding knowledge in CSS and HTML to be able to apply them to the proper places, it does allow you to brand the entire page to match your fonts, your colors, your sizes, any styling. This really allows you to match your web page and create a seamless transition and student experience. As far as the labels go, depending on how you're presenting the events in your new portal, you can just add a separate static content block that has the heading, I think it was virtual events or in person. I mean, those are two popular ones right now because you want to keep those separate. Place it directly above the calendar in the portal view. Or if it's, if you're trying to replicate what there was on the event landing pages, you can put it up at the top as the page header. But keep in mind, if you're doing this within your applicant portal and you're putting, let's say, admitted student events on there and only your admitted students should see that, you'll want to put the same filter on the heading that you're putting on the calendar to make sure that, the students are seeing what they should see. But honestly, the ability to add the CSS classes to any of them really, and easily, not through the file editor, has really just opened up a whole new world. So
I want to jump in on that because we do our Slate Squad weekly meetings where we kind of discuss what new features we've come across and run into. He was saving this, and just like, it's not easy to like impress everybody and like make us all like drop our jaws, but like Chris was so excited, and it was really cool. Like he was very, very giddy to see that and share it. And it was cool. That was fun.
Cool. So, okay, another question we have here. Illinois State University. Best practices for utilization of an organization record page dashboard. Anybody
Yeah,
want to?
I'll take this one.
Oh, all right. You beat me to it again, Megan.
Either one of us could answer, and you can chime in. I'm sure I probably won't reference something you might want me to reference. So this question really depends on how much information you want a school to see, or a staff member to see about a school organization. You have the opportunity to add lots of information with the org dashboard through dashboard queries, actually. So if you get in there and play around, you can actually add territory or region information, staff assign information, inquiry history or applicant history. So you can actually customize your query depending on what table you're referencing to show which data points you're interested about. So if it's the applicant history, maybe you add the decision and or their app status or something like that, see how far they made it. That would be really helpful. Or if it's inquiry, maybe I don't know, various inquiry data points. If you end up having a rating score from the question earlier, what were the students' level of interest from that school? So there's a lot of options there. Ultimately, you can basically give them as much or as little information on that page as you think will help them understand the context of the school. This does make me think of two additional points, though, that I like to reiterate. If you haven't already added the cluster report from the Slate Template library, you should go do that right now. We've built both org dashboards and customized cluster reports for Rocco at Susquehanna, who I think is also on today. If you're interested in understanding the org and the students associated with the organization, you'll love the cluster report because it allows you to add a reader tab group of material that shows all the students from the school for the current and past cycles, and like a nice little report there, again, with customized columns, data points that you want to see for all of those different students. So that's super helpful in the reader. We also talked about org contacts and how to handle them on our recent webinar with Consultation. Of course, there are org contacts connected to the organization, but if you're looking at counselors and their relationship to the student, you can also allow the student to add the counselor as a relationship and then actually create a record for that counselor, thus linking the records. So then you could click on a student and see the counselor on their record, or you could click on the counselor and see the whole list of students they're associated with. So all that to say, there's a ton you can do with orgs and org contacts. So I would just consider, what you need to see, who you want to communicate to, how you're communicating to them, and what process works best for you internally. Anything else, Rob?
The only thing I would throw in there is, because you've covered a lot, the only thing I'd throw in is that I would definitely take advantage of everything that Megan said, because now with configurable joins, it's so much easier to do all of that, like updating the organization dashboard, working with counselor contacts and how they're and the relationships with the students. Configurable joins just makes that so much easier. I remember like a year or two ago, as we were trying to do some of these things for our schools, it required these really complex custom SQL queries that you would have to spend a lot of time building. But now with configurable joins, it's a lot easier. So even more reason to go ahead and do these things.
Oh, speaking of configurable joins, we got a question here from Mount Holyoke College. Can you do a configurable join to get data from a scheduler form and an event form at the same time?
I'll jump in there because I love configurable joins, a statement you'll probably never hear anyone say. But I think it scares people a little bit when they haven't used it and they're used to the basic prospect query bases and applications and things like that. But configurable joins is really, really powerful, but it's also really, really complicated if you don't know what you're doing. So with scheduler and events, what I would point out first, one tip is when you're using filters for configurable joins and you do a form filter or you're at the form base, events, interviews, and all of your forms are in that form base, right? So there are filters for a type. So you can put scheduler, event, or regular form. So you're not picking up your inquiry data and all that kind of stuff. And then using subqueries, I always say when in doubt, use a subquery, because a lot of times when you're using the top layer filters and you're joining thing in the top layer, it's applying to everything and linking everything kind of similarly. So I just personally like in configurable joins to do subqueries whenever I'm doing filters and exports. So I'm getting exactly what I'm looking for. So in other words, if you're looking for scheduler information, do a subquery, join in the form database in the subquery, and then link to all the things you want to get out of scheduler. And then go back out to the top level, do an or statement, do another subquery, and go into the events module, pull out all the stuff specific to events that you want. And then again, when you go to export it, you can use subqueries to say, just show me scheduler in this line, just show me event titles in this line, things like that. So just play around a little bit more with the subqueries. I think you'll find that you can get a lot more flexibility and get to what you need to.
I'd second, Jim, what you said there about the subqueries. I think it's really helpful to use those. And in fact, in some cases, you have to use them to get the correct data. But I know if you try to add too many joins to that top level, I've certainly found this, you can kind of muck up your query pretty quickly, and it gets confusing as to like, which join should I be joining to? And so, using the subqueries for that can help you to keep things straight. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say also the last thing on that too is whenever you do a join, if you're joining multiple, like you're going to join forms or application bases 5 times within the same query, rename every single one of those very specifically to what it's supposed to be joining to. Just like when you rename a subquery, rename the actual join to say school address by GeoMarket, not just GeoMarket, so that you know what you're actually linking to when you're working with it. So happy configurable joining.
Here's another question from Mount Holyoke while we're here. Can origin sources be retro refreshed and reassigned when adding a new source?
So I think Jim's favorite feature is configurable joins. Mine is definitely not, but but origin sources and ping are probably my 2 favorite Slate functionality. So origin sources, like that's the advantage of it, is you don't have to build it all up front and be completely done with it. That anytime you build out and re-put in new origin sources, new groups, it will retroactively apply those overnight to any records that have been updated in the past year. So it'll look back a full year, automatically. So it will run on a nightly basis. If you do want anybody beyond that, so if you're looking for before that last year, you can retroactively refresh records and do that. That may not always be something you want to do. So there are situations based on how sources are set up that you may want to keep those older ones as they were prior to that. So if there's certain, new origin sources that you put in place, it may not be something that you want to go beyond that for that first year, that most recent year, but it does do it automatically. So again, you don't have to set everything up and have a plan for everything, because ultimately, as you start building out origin sources and you put that together and look for those individual cases and those individual students, like you will see records that you're like, that shouldn't be an origin source for them. They came in a lot earlier. What am I missing? What do I need to add? It would be very rare if if you've been on Slate for a couple of years and then you put your origin sources in and then everybody's good. It does take a while to kind of build out new ones and figure out where are those gaps that you need to address. So yes, long answer, they absolutely do refresh for the first year automatically, and then you can go beyond that.
And just chiming in here too, because Ted and I have rebuilt several sets of origin sources together. I also really like this feature. One thing that we found that I actually had been doing origin sources for a while before I found this is to definitely troubleshoot your app creation origin source. If you're using the application creation type, but you're also bringing in the Common App, sometimes the Common App import can trigger before the application creation or vice versa, whatever, it's one way or the other. But no, sometimes your app creation, if it is a Common App, self app, however that works, depending on what types of records you're bringing in, that is definitely one to make sure before you rely on app creation as a stealth app origin source, to make sure it's actually attributing to the people it needs to.
And is what you're saying, like even removing origin sources will do the same thing. So even if you're not adding them, they will refresh if you do remove some, which you may want to do, because we've done that too, where there's none getting hit on certain origin sources and then they're okay to remove.
Thanks, Ted and Megan. Here's another question from Pace University. Mapping fields from a form to update school. Example, review sheet fields to update the school profile. Can anybody
I mean,
take that?
if I'm hearing the question correctly, and if I'm not,
Do you want me to repeat it?
reach out to me. But when it comes to updating, let's say the school record within a student's record through the reader process, you can easily add those fields that are tied to the school record that's tied to that student. If you're talking about, and this just brings to mind one of the more recent things that's happened with one of the schools I'm working with in regards to, let's say, class size or highest GPA, right? And you want to know what that is for that organization across the board for any app that's there, and you want it to apply to that student. We worked out a couple of different things. I mean, there are different ways you can approach that. One is a portal that allows you to pull in students that are tied to an org record and then be able to review all that information. You can do the same thing with a query. The recommendation by Technolutions is to create an org scoped custom field that can store class size or highest GPA, or whatever that field is that you're wanting to be applied, and then use a reader review form to update these two fields in your organization scope school check, or like if you have a flow to actually check that information, right? Or just having this form set aside that's org scoped. The other idea is then to take that information, build a query that's configurable joins query based on school that's joined to the organization, and then export that data, and then turn around and import it right back in, so that you're then updating all of the app records based on the highest GPA that exists within the org record. What that means is that you would have to run an overnight process. So it's in some cases maybe not ideal or extremely efficient, depending on how quickly you want that to happen. Again, if I have misunderstood the question, reach out to me separately and we can definitely talk. But if I'm following, those are the two different options in regards to school scoped fields, right? That you might want to update, either one on an individual record, or if you wanted to batch it and have it tied to an org. The org thing was just because I've been working with that recently, and that's definitely one way to do it. Chris, or anybody else?
Anybody else? Okay, here's a fairly long question, so just bear with me. This is from Augsburg University. How can your SIS import apply data to an application record versus a person record? Situation: we receive a daily file from our SIS system to populate fields, one being registration status. This field populates items on our dashboard, which is a person scoped form. We have students that have multiple applications in Slate and matriculate multiple times. A student enrolls as an undergraduate and then comes back as a graduate. When I write a report to see how many graduate students are registered, a student's registration status from a different application is used. If I clear out this field each cycle, I'll lose historical data. Does that make sense? Everybody got that?
Nobody?
I'm defaulting to Rob. You mentioned the SIS. I can't. I'm just going to wait until Rob chimes in.
All right, because it's your birthday. Yeah, so I think what this triggers in my mind is one of the very earliest conversations that we have with schools when we start implementing them. One of the very first things we do is begin talking about fields and prompts, setting up fields in an instance. And that conversation that we always have is talking about the scopes. And over the course of this webinar, I mean, I know, Jeremiah, you were talking about org scope fields and forms before, and I know I've talked about reader scope versus app scope. And, I think that is a really important conversation, especially as to what you're talking about here, with wanting to allow for different applications to be updated at different times, right? So this is essentially the difference between a person scope field and an app scope field. And sometimes the fields, it's going to be person scope. Sometimes it's going to be app scope. Sometimes in this case, you could go either way, right? And maybe you make it a person scope because you can only be registered at an institution once at a time, right? So maybe you go app scope. But I think in your particular situation, it sounds like because you really want to track, if they apply as an undergraduate first, then as a graduate, did they register as an undergraduate, then are they registering again as a graduate student? By making it an app scope field, that really allows you to retain that information, because each app record on the person record will have its own version of that field that you can store that data in. So I would really consider making this an app scope field rather than a person scope field that you kind of have to undo every time. And that will, I think, allow you to do what you need to do. Now, that being said, and I think, Jim, this next part, I think you may have touched on this a little bit before when you were talking about like app IDs and so on. If you're going to change the field from person scope to app scope on your daily import from the SIS, you will need to now have some additional identifier that not only allows you to identify the person record that this needs to go to, but the specific application record that this field needs to update as well. And so that could be, if you already have a specific app scoped ID in your SIS, you can use that. Sometimes it's a combination of fields, like Jim was saying before, the ID plus entry term or ID plus year, whatever that might be. You can use a field fusion to do that. But ultimately, I think that's the route that you're going to want to go here. The only other thought that I had was, if you wanted to be able to maintain like multiple registrations for the same application. So the undergraduate student registered for fall 2020 plus spring 21, then fall 21. You may also want to consider, in addition to making it an app scope field, make it a multi-value field so that you can add different registrations for each term, but then it's still matched up with, because it's app scope, the undergraduate record was registered in these terms. The graduate record was registered in these terms.
Hey, Rob, if I can jump in too, I have one thing I just thought of too. Another thing, instead of doing a field, when I was on a campus, we brought back information when students registered, and we just made it an application decision code. So after deposit, the final decision was enrolled was the actual application decision code. And that way it applies specific to that application rather than just a field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point too, Jim. Yeah.
It's an app scope. It's related to the application, like Rob said, as opposed to the person.
Okay, I think we have time for potentially 2 more questions. So we'll just go. The next one's from Sacred Heart University. How to build an agency portal and manage logins. Also, how do you host an event in Slate that brings in students, counselors, agents without creating a new prospect record? Chris or
Portals.
Jeremiah, this is a portal. This is portals.
Portals.
You got that one. You got this one.
Hey, Vernon. With portals and with having agencies or counselors or any of these types of things, typically the best way to do that is have a data set that contains those individuals. So you already have the org contact data set for your counselors. You create another one that's agencies, and you can put those individuals in that data set. Those data sets you can also tie to a portal that has security settings that are based on the data set. Now, if you think of an applicant record, when a student applies, they create a username and a password. When a data set record is created, and you send them to this portal, it will prompt them to create a password. And they will log in using their email and this password, just like a student does when they apply. So you can also add securities onto it to where you can have specific sensitive information potentially that is under lock and key. You can then customize that portal to the user. So if it's an agency and you have a list of students that are tied to that agency, you can show those students based on a related data set row field that you've put on the applicant record that you've then tied to that agency. And that's use that field to then populate your view for the user. Now, I think the second part of that question was about events. Right, Chris?
Yes, how to host an event in Slate that brings in students, counselors, agents without creating a new prospect record.
Okay. Now, I'm going to say I don't have a ton of experience in even attempting this, but here's like my throwing a theory out there. And if anybody wants to say, Jeremiah, you're stupid, here's actually how you do it, then that's totally fine. But I do think that you can still do targeted emailing that links to an event. still using the ID or the GUID or the GUID or whatever you want to call it. You just have to create different communications for each data set because you're going to be pulling that information from different queries that have different bases. And so that's why it's important to kind of think about what those are going to be, and then you send them to the registration. And in theory, it's a person-based, if it's a person-scoped event, it's still a person record, just in a different data set. So in theory, they should still be able to register as that. So again, don't have a ton of experience in doing it, but in theory, that's how I would approach it, and at least start testing that type of process. Rob, go for it, man.
I'm being Megan here. If the goal is to not create new prospect records, could you just not map the fields on the registration form?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, valid.
And if you're looking to contact them, you could still pull form field email addresses and things.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would do.
That's true.
Or if it's event, you can have event communications, right?
Definitely.
For the,
Yep. With your export keys added to your non-map fields.
mhm.
Okay, one more question. One more, and then we got to go. And this is a new one from Auburn University, one of our new college partners from Auburn. Telerecruiting communications, drip marketing with print pieces that are not sent out through Slate.
I called
That's a
it.
calm thing.
So if this is from Kristen at Auburn, hi Kristen. If I do not answer this well, or if this isn't really what you're asking, we can talk about it on Thursday. But this is first, I'm going to do a shameless plug for Slate printing. This is why it's so nice to have everything kind of multi-channel within Slate, is because you can then schedule postcards, text, emails, and you can see that within that campaign module, which is really nice. But if you need to do print outside of Slate, what you can do is you can set up, say like you're running a junior inquiry campaign, you set up that campaign within Slate and you have it running on drip marketing. And then say you want to send a postcard 5 days after you send email number 2. You would need to go build a query. So you have your messages, your emails in deliver, maybe your text messages, and then you have a query that you can run that says mailing sent, email number 2, today -5, or however many days you want it to go afterwards. And you run that query and you can set it up where you can retrieve only new records. And then you can send that to your printer. And you're going to want to monitor that daily just so that you keep up with the drip marketing. But that I would say is the easiest way, unless anybody else wants to chime in really quick. Good? Fast enough?
Guess nobody wanted to chime in, Laura. Well done. Well, thank you for joining us. Sorry, time's up. We didn't get to answer your questions. We'll be in touch with you and we'll provide answers in our next blog post. We actually be on the lookout for our follow-up email, which will have today's recording as well as our next blog post. And we just hope you have a great day. Thank you everybody for joining us today.
Happy birthday, Megan.
Yeah, happy birthday, Megan.
Happy birthday, Megan.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.